The jungle air pressed like a damp shroud against Kael Vorn's bare arms as he staggered through the undergrowth, pulse pistol holstered and slick with sweat. His crash site, a twisted ruin of alloy and ash, smoldered somewhere behind him in the shadowed canopy of Velmara 6. Static buzzed uselessly in his earpiece. His command unit was gone. The tactical display in his HUD flickered, glitching out with each movement. He was alone. He hadn't expected to survive the drop. Emergency separation protocols had kicked in too late. The Corex Syndicate's orbital railguns had reduced his reconnaissance ship to slag. But Kael had crawled out alive, half-dazed, dragging a half-charged rifle and half a map of a world no human had walked on before. Velmara 6 was off-limits, technically. Too unstable, too wild, and too politically flammable to touch. But that was before the rumors, resources, gems, biological anomalies. Earth Intelligence Division wanted eyes on the ground. He didn't expect the ground to blink back. Kael saw her through the steam rising from a geothermal vent. A flicker of movement at first, like a will-o'-the-wisp darting between ferns. Then a figure collapsed, barely breathing. Blue skin shimmered in the mist like polished stone. Long silver hair stuck to her cheek with blood. Her bodysuit, torn and half-melted, revealed patches of iridescent bruises along her ribs. She was Velmari, and she was dying. Kael moved without thinking. Training said to assess first, never approach unknowns, especially sentience. But instinct overrode protocol. He dropped to one knee, scanning her vitals through the HUD. The pulse was erratic, her breathing shallow. Her body twitched when he touched her wrist, a delicate shiver, but she didn't pull away. A shallow wound across her abdomen was crusted with something that looked like violet glass. He realized in awe and disgust it wasn't shrapnel, it was her blood, hardened crystalline. He pulled out a stim gel pack and pressed it gently against the wound. The contact made her jolt, eyes snapping open, blue, luminous, wide with confusion and fear. She tried to speak, but her mouth only moved in soft vowels. The translator implant in Kael's jaw hadn't updated for this dialect. Still, he raised his hands, slowly, palms open. Universal language of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but maybe the tone would carry. She blinked, focusing her gaze, scanning his uniform, the emblem, the broken armor. Then she looked into his face, eyes narrowing, trembling just slightly. She recognized him as the enemy. Kael stayed still. A low whimper escaped her lips as her body tried to shift away, but her strength failed. In that moment, her expression changed, not surrender, not defiance, just exhaustion. Trust not given, but born of necessity. He slipped his arms beneath her, careful of the sharp angles of crystal that had formed along her side. She was impossibly light. Her skin was cool to the touch, like holding polished marble, warmed just slightly by sunlight. She didn't resist as he hoisted her up and turned toward the denser trees, searching for cover, somewhere they could disappear. The jungle roared around them, unfamiliar cries, flashes of bioluminescent creatures skittering across trunks. Kael pushed forward, boots sloshing through glowing moss. Vines tugged at his legs like lazy fingers. The forest watched. He found shelter in a collapsed hollow root the size of a cargo shuttle. Inside, filtered light cast soft blue shadows against her skin. She lay on a bed of dry leaves and moss, eyes fluttering closed again. For the first time since impact, Kael let his breath out. He studied her face, delicate and angular, foreign, yet stunning in a way that evoked both danger and reverence. There were subtle ridges beneath the skin near her temples, like waves frozen mid-motion. Her chest rose and fell slowly. He'd risked court-martial for less, but this didn't feel like a mistake. There was something haunting in the way she'd looked at him. Not like a soldier looks at an enemy. More like a survivor looks at a storm. He leaned back against the wall of the root hollow, watching the pale green light shift across her silver hair. Somewhere deep in the jungle, a beast howled a high, bone-rattling sound. But Kael didn't reach for his weapon. The most dangerous thing he'd encountered today wasn't outside this root. It was breathing beside him, wounded and barely conscious, and already taking root in his thoughts. By the time the Velmari woman stirred again, the artificial daylight from Kael's wrist lamp had faded to a thin pulse. Outside, the jungle was alive with movement, creatures, prowling wings, fluttering long shadows sliding across vines. She sat up slowly, wincing arms wrapped around her abdomen. Her gaze darted to him, still wary, but less defensive now. Her fingers grazed the bandages he'd wrapped around her wound. A strange look passed over her face. Surprise, almost disbelief. She met his eyes, uncertain. Kael offered a dry piece of ration biscuit. She sniffed it, nose wrinkling. Then, to his astonishment, she took it. They sat together in silence, the jungle breathing around them. She nibbled carefully, eyes never leaving his. Kael watched her closely, not with suspicion, but curiosity. The way her skin subtly shifted tones in the dim light, the way her expression changed with each new texture and taste. She wasn't just healing, she was observing him too. Kael decided to speak softly, narrating as he checked his gear. The words didn't matter, the tone did. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to mimic his cadence. When he said his name, Kael, she echoed it almost inaudibly. Her voice, like smooth glass, dragged through water. Then she touched her own chest lightly. Lyssae. He nodded once. Lyssae. Her name sounded like wind through crystal. They left the hollow at first light. Her wound was sealed enough for slow walking, though she leaned on him more than she wanted to admit. Kael didn't mention it, just wrapped his arm under her shoulders with easy familiarity. Her skin was cool, but every time he made contact, it seemed to warm by degrees, whether from embarrassment, effort, or something else he couldn't say. The terrain grew steep as they climbed through dense terrain veined with moss that pulsed faint green beneath their boots. Insects buzzed in shimmering clouds. Once a lizard the size of a man darted past, its tail trailing sparks. Lyssae tensed at every noise, but Kael moved with relaxed caution. She began to mirror his movements, watching his posture, mimicking his way of crouching low to inspect strange footprints or shifting plants with the back of a gloved hand. They found water by midday. A small stream trickled beneath hanging vines, the liquid glowing faintly violet. Kael knelt and ran a scanner over it safe enough. He drank first, then offered her a cupped hand. She hesitated for only a moment before drinking. Later, when he stumbled on a jagged root and muttered a curse, she laughed. Not a mocking sound, more like curiosity in laughter's shape. It was the first sign of levity between them. Kael grinned. "Glad I could amuse you," he muttered. She reached out and touched his chest, just over the insignia on his vest. Her fingers brushed the worn metal Earth Intelligence Division. Then she drew a slow circle over his heart. He stopped breathing for a moment. It wasn't flirtation exactly. It felt older than that, like something ceremonial. A question without words. He responded without thinking, lifting his hand to rest gently over hers. No translation required. By dusk, the jungle had thickened again, and Kael signaled for them to make camp. He found a shallow ledge beneath an overhanging ridge tucked between dense vines. They built a fire using bioreactive bark flames, casting soft blue shadows over the stone. She sat cross-legged facing the fire. Her expression was unreadable eyes reflecting light like polished sapphires. Kael pulled out a ration pack, splitting it between them, heating the protein slab with a low-heat thermal tab. She examined it skeptically before taking a bite. This time, no wrinkle of the nose. When the temperature dropped, he offered her his jacket. She refused at first, pride flashing across her face, but her trembling limbs gave her away. He draped it over her shoulders without waiting. She didn't stop him. That night, she curled beside him without speaking, their bodies close under the tangled roots. Her head rested near his collarbone. At one point, her hand found his again, not seeking warmth, seeking reassurance. Kael lay awake for hours, staring at the bioluminescent canopy above. There was no logic to any of this. No mission parameter that covered rescuing mysterious, beautiful alien women who touched your heart before they spoke your language. But he didn't want to be anywhere else. At dawn, the air felt heavier, saturated with heat and moisture, as if the jungle had begun to sweat. They moved slowly, Kael taking point, while Lyssae followed with soft, agile steps. Her movement had improved, though her body still showed signs of strain. The wound pulsed faintly beneath her suit, where crystallized blood had formed semi-transparent scabs that glimmered beneath thin fabric. Their destination was uncertain. Kael only knew they had to keep moving. His instincts screamed that the Korax Syndicate strike hadn't been random. If their fighters had orders to shoot down exploratory crafts, then there was something buried on Velmara 6 they didn't want anyone to find. They were an hour into the march when Lyssae stopped suddenly. Her expression flickered strange and unreadable. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Then, without a word, she gestured to Kael with a raised hand stay. She stepped behind a curtain of fern-like leaves and vanished. Kael frowned. The jungle sounds had dulled to a hush, as though every creature held its breath. He busied himself with the scanner, trying to map any geothermal signatures or hidden installations. He tried not to listen, but a sound reached him anyway. Delicate, like wind chimes underwater. It was quiet at first, then faded, then silence again. Something pulled at his attention. He turned just a glance, then froze. Lyssae crouched just beyond the foliage, her bodysuit partially unsealed. Around her feet, scattered like spilled candy, were gemstones. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, small, brilliant, impossibly clean. They sparkled in the filtered light, casting glimmers across her skin. She noticed him too late. Their eyes locked. A second stretched into eternity. Her expression twisted in horror. A flush of deep indigo crept across her cheeks as she scrambled to reseal her suit. Kael spun away instantly, face burning. I didn't mean to. The words stumbled out uselessly. He heard her footsteps approach behind him slower now. She stopped a pace away. Her voice, when it came, was low and tight. You saw. He didn't turn. Only a glimpse. I thought something was wrong. You were gone, the jungle went quiet, and I'm sorry. Silence stretched thin between them. It is shameful, she said at last. Kael turned slightly. You're hurt. You needed a moment. That's not shameful. Not that. Her voice was barely a whisper now. What we produce. It is considered vulgar to acknowledge. We do not speak of it. He turned fully now, looking her in the eyes, careful not to glance at the cloth bundle she now carried in both hands, wrapped around the stones like smuggled sin. Lyssae, he said gently. On Earth, those are worth more than a starship. She blinked. You jest. Not even close. He stepped forward, crouching slightly to meet her eye level. Those are gemstones by every standard. High grade, maybe flawless. She stared down at the cloth as if it had betrayed her. But their waste, she said almost to herself. He smiled wryly. One species' waste is another species' retirement plan. For a moment, she looked ready to argue. Then her shoulders slumped. She let out a sound, half sigh, half laugh. Her hands tightened on the bundle. When I was a child, she said softly, we would find them in the forest. Some of the little ones collected them, played games. We thought they were just pretty. We didn't know. Kael sat beside her on a mossy rock. You still don't. Not fully. We have no idea what this means. But if it's true, if your biology creates high-value crystalline matter, then Velmara 6 just became the most important planet in this sector. Her jaw clenched, which means more humans, more Koreks. Unless we do something about it first. She looked up at him, startled. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. He reached out gently, touching the back of her hand. I didn't crash here by accident. Earth intelligence suspected something. Resource anomalies. Strange mineral readings. The Syndicate shot me down to keep me from seeing this. She stared at him in silence, eyes wide with dawning understanding. You think they know, she whispered. Kael nodded. I think they've known for a while. And I think they're about to do something very, very bad. As if summoned by the truth, the ground trembled, a faint, distant rumble. Birds took flight in a scatter of neon feathers. Lyssae's skin shimmered in reaction, glowing faintly along her collarbones. Kael rose, scanning the tree line. He reached for his pistol. What is it, she asked. Trouble, he said. And we need to go, now. They moved quickly, the soft bundle of gemstones clutched tightly in her arms. The trees blurred past in streaks of green and blue. Behind them, the sound of propulsion engines grew louder, low insectile hums rising in pitch. When they reached a ridge overlooking a deep ravine, Kael pulled her down. Through his scope, he saw them. 3 Koreks Syndicate crafts, sleek and gunmetal gray, descending into a nearby clearing. Armor-suited troopers fanned out, scanning the terrain with wide-beam optics. They weren't looking for minerals. They were looking for them. Kael turned to Lyssae. Her skin had dimmed again, her breathing shallow. But there was fire behind her eyes now. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. And she wasn't alone. Kael led them deeper into the jungle, veering off the high paths into the thickest underbrush he could find. The Koreks ships had not landed randomly. They knew exactly where to look. That meant surveillance, heat tracking, maybe even satellite scans. But they didn't know the terrain like Lyssae did. She moved with sharpened instinct, now her earlier fragility replaced by focused urgency. Her glowing skin had faded into darker blues, blending with the shadows. Kael followed her lead this time, trusting the way she pushed aside vines and skimmed across mossy rock without a sound. The woman he had saved in a hollow root now seemed reborn as a wraith of the forest. They found a cave tucked beneath an overgrown cliff face, its entrance hidden behind flowering creepers. The space inside was cool and dry, lined with glittering mineral formations that reminded Kael uneasily of Lyssae's crystallized blood. As they rested, Kael activated the microscanner embedded in his wrist plate. A map flickered into view, low-resolution glitching, but enough to spot a small blip farther north. Not Corex tech. Something older. Abandoned. Subterranean signatures here, he muttered, pointing at the blurred glyphs. Maybe an old Velmari outpost. If it still has power, we can mask our heat sigs. Maybe even find communications. Lyssae tilted her head, recognizing the general coordinates. Her voice was low. Velmari Sanctum. Ancient. Forbidden. Kael looked up. That mean we shouldn't go. Her eyes glinted. It means no one would expect us to. They moved at dusk, slipping through shafts of twilight filtered by the dense canopy. The air grew denser with humidity and the scent of sap and smoke. Somewhere behind them, the faint pulse of Corex drones buzzed faintly, searching, always searching. They reached the sanctum entrance by nightfall. The structure was partially overgrown, a crumbling spire of blackened stone veined with bioluminescent roots. The front seal shimmered with glyphs Kael's systems couldn't translate. Lyssae placed her palm against the center rune. The door responded, instantly sliding open with a sigh of ancient air. Inside the sanctum glowed with dim blue light. Walls etched with spirals and mirrored patterns reflected soft energy pulses. Kael felt a hum in his bones. Not mechanical, something more organic. Alive. The central chamber was round and sunken. In its center, a pedestal. Upon it rested a strange device, like a cocoon made of crystal and liquid light. Its surface shifted constantly, reacting to their presence. Lyssae approached it with reverence. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The Bondwell. Kael stepped closer, scanning. What is it? Healing matrix, she said. But also, something else. It merges the wounded, aligns bodies, sometimes memories. Kael's HUD lit with alert pings. The device radiated a dense field of quantum entanglement, something beyond Earth tech, something ancient. A harmonic resonance with DNA signatures, bio-encoded, sympathetic. Will it work for me? He asked. Lyssae looked at him slowly. Only if we enter together. Kael hesitated. He understood what that meant. Shared energy fields, mutual imprinting. This was no ordinary medical pod. It was Velmari biological fusion, a ritual, not just a procedure. But her side was bleeding again. Violet shimmer leaked through her bodysuit, slow and persistent. Let's do it, he said simply. They stepped into this pod together. The shell closed around them with a hiss, casting them into radiant darkness. Inside, warmth enveloped them, liquid light touching skin like silk. Kael felt his senses begin to blur. The walls disappeared. So did time. Memories flickered like stars behind his eyes, not his own. He saw Lyssae as a child chasing glowing birds through spirals of light in the temple gardens. Felt her laughter ripple through his chest. She saw him in training, standing solemnly under the Terran sun, fists clenched as comrades were loaded into body bags after a failed mission. She felt the weight he carried. Their thoughts braided. Kael saw her first pain, the burning shame when her body began to shed stones in youth told never to speak of it. The way others averted their eyes. He felt the loneliness of being beautiful, powerful, and cursed. Lyssae saw his instinctive need to protect even when rules said no. Saw how his mind worked in corners and corridors, how he calculated risk but leapt anyway. How his hands steadied without hesitation when someone else trembled. Emotion became language, light became memory, and in the center of it all, a flare of energy, sharp and searing. Kael felt it first as a throb behind his ribs. Lyssae gasped beside him. Their skin lit with mirror blue pulses, their hearts racing in tandem. The pod read their sync, accelerated it, amplified it, bound it. Not sexual, not just. It was something older, deeper. The pod dissolved around them like mist. They stumbled out together, breathless, glowing with the same fractal light. Kael looked at her, saw the difference. Her eyes shimmered now with gold threads. His veins, faintly visible through skin, glowed blue like hers. What did we just do? He murmured. Lyssae exhaled. We fused. Outside, the jungle trembled again. A Corex strike drone descended through the trees, sweeping a crimson beam across the ruins. Its scanner turned and paused. Inside the sanctum, Kael and Lyssae moved in perfect silence. Then they struck. The first shot came from Kael's pulse rifle, modified now by the sanctum's energy fields. The bolt crackled with twin harmonics, his heat her biosignature. It tore through the drone's shell in one blast. They moved together like a single entity. She launched into a sprint body glowing with combat rhythm. He followed half a breath behind, reading her intent before she acted. When she leapt, he ducked. When he fired, she covered. They danced between shadows, between seconds. The bond wasn't metaphorical anymore. He could feel her thoughts like wind guiding his steps, warning of danger pressing him to move just before a plasma bolt scorched the air where he'd stood. They reached the tree line overlooking the Corex landing zone. Kael aimed. "Let's end this." Lyssae's hand closed over his. Together they fired. The Syndicate convoy erupted into chaos. The joint shot from Kael and Lyssae's bonded pulse shattered the Corex central uplink tower in a single spiraling arc of violet-white energy. The blast cracked the air like a thunderclap, and for a heartbeat, the jungle fell utterly silent. Then came the screams. Kael was already moving, vaulting down the ridge with Lyssae beside him, their motions eerily synchronized. He felt her breath in his lungs, her heartbeat mirroring his, even as his own fingers clenched his rifle, and she launched glowing projectiles from the crystalline veins along her arms. Their hybrid shots streaked through the air like comet trails, disrupting Corex shielding systems before Kael's rounds slammed through their chest plates. They fought like one. Syndicate troopers scattered behind cargo containers barked into comms, scrambled for counterfire, but they couldn't target what they couldn't track. The fusion between Kael's human instincts and Lyssae's post-biological reflexes had rendered them unpredictable, almost erratic. A Corex gunner opened up with a wide-beam scatter cannon. Kael dove low. Lyssae leapt high and the beam tore harmlessly through the space between them. She landed behind the gunner, wrapping her legs around his armor and driving a palm into his helmet. A pulse of light flashed from her skin, and the man collapsed unconscious before he hit the ground. Kael slid to cover beside her, panting. She turned eyes bright. "You're learning," she said, breathless. He grinned. "You're terrifying." More drones zipped overhead. Kael rolled his wrist interface, calling for emergency jamming. Static howled across their frequencies. The drone lights blinked erratically, confused. He raised his eyes to the ridge beyond the camp and froze. At the top stood a tall Velmari male robed in ceremonial armor, flanked by a squad of elite royal guards. His silver-marked face was grim. The guards held weapons at the ready, but none fired. Kael cursed under his breath. Velmari High Command. Lyssae's face darkened. Sarn Ver, commander of the Prime Minister's Protection Division. If he was here in person, then the Velmari government knew everything and had chosen a side. They didn't have to wonder which. Moments later, a projection flared into existence above the Corex field tent. The image of Prime Minister Trell, tall, dignified eyes heavy with exhaustion, flickered into view. "This is a planetary emergency," the Prime Minister's voice declared. "The Corex Syndicate has violated sovereign agreements. They act under threat and under lies." Kael blinked in surprise. "He knows." Lyssae nodded slowly, voice tight. "Not just that. He's broadcasting." Another image appeared, stolen communications holograms of forged Velmari genealogy charts, Draxian encryption logs. The truth, unraveling in real time, piped into every Velmari city and human listening post in orbit. The Corex deception fabricated evidence that the Velmari had been bioengineered as living mineral processors was being exposed. And with it something more, a final sequence. A genetic scan from the Sanctum's pod replaying in public. Kael and Lyssae fused in glowing silhouette. A heartbeat shared, energy transferred. The broadcast framed it not as a scandal, but a revelation. Lyssae turned to him, trembling slightly. "They're showing us. We just became part of their mythos," Kael said softly. "Proof that your people aren't synthetic." "No," she corrected, voice raw. "Proof that we're evolving." The Syndicate forces panicked. Kael and Lyssae moved as one, sweeping through the camp. They weren't just fighting now, they were driving history. The Velmari guards hesitated, watching. Some even lowered their weapons. A few began to help, but it wasn't over yet. A Corex shuttle dropped from the sky in a trail of exhaust and screaming engines. Its ramp lowered before it even hit the ground, and armored figures poured out heavily augmented, faceless, carrying bioharvesters and fusion blades. At their center, Archon Vec, a towering insectile commander with obsidian armor and a segmented face. His claws twitched as he surveyed the battlefield, and his voice crackled through a speaker grill on his chest. "You've interfered with proprietary reclamation protocols," he rasped. "This biological anomaly is now corporate asset." Kael raised his rifle. "Come take it." The battle shifted instantly. Vec's guard surged forward. Kael dove sideways, firing as he rolled. Lyssae ran headlong into the charge, her crystalline projections slicing through energy shields. She turned mid-air, flinging a burst of shards that detonated with harmonic pulses, ripping apart the air and the men in it. Kael vaulted a pile of crates and came down behind a trooper, jamming the butt of his weapon into the armor's exposed joint. Another trooper turned, only to be blinded by Lyssae's skin, suddenly glowing so bright it seared like a flashbang. They fought back to back, now breath sinking again, thoughts brushing each other's like wind on skin. Kael's hand slipped to a plasma charge. "We detonate the shuttle," he said through gritted teeth. "They lose their escape, their gear, everything." Lyssae gave one firm nod. They split. Kael drew fire, ducking behind cargo rigs, firing in controlled bursts. Lyssae moved in a weaving pattern, confusing scanners, drawing attention away. Kael reached the base of the shuttle, tucked the charge under the ramp, and armed the fuse. 30 seconds. He turned and sprinted back toward Lyssae, shouting her name. She was already moving toward him, bleeding light. Her left side burned, but still standing. He caught her mid-run spun and threw them both down behind the ridge. The charge went off like a dying star. Flames roared into the sky, incinerating the entire landing pad. Bodies, equipment, syndicate hopes, all atomized in a fireball tinged with crystalline sparks. Silence returned. Kael rolled onto his back, gasping. Beside him, Lyssae clutched his hand. Her pulse beat wild and strong. He looked up into the ash-streaked sky. In the distance, Earth intelligence gunships finally began descending. Too late for the battle, just in time for the reckoning. The Earth intelligence dropships touched down in a wide V formation, sending shockwaves of displaced air across the scorched jungle clearing. Their hulls gleamed black and steel blue under the fractured sunlight, bristling with sensor arrays and heavy plasma cannons. The last of the Corex syndicate forces had already fled or fallen, leaving behind smoke-scattered armor and the broken remnants of a failed invasion. Kael helped Lyssae to her feet, supporting her as they stood atop the ridge, glowing faintly in unison. Their clothing was scorched, their bodies marked with bruises and crystal shards, but neither flinched. Earth intelligence soldiers approached warily at first, rifles half lowered until the lead officer stepped forward and recognized Kael. "Captain Vorn," the woman said, her voice sharp under the retracting visor of her combat helm. "Captain Asha Ren, Earth Intelligence, rapid response. We received your distress beacon. Situation." Kael motioned behind him to the ruins. Corex violated treaty space. Attempted forced biological extraction of Velmari citizens. Targeted my vessel and suppressed evidence of species-level deception. Ren's eyes narrowed. "And her, she's the reason I'm standing here," he replied evenly. "Lyssae of the Velmari, survivor resistance fighter." And he paused, watching the light play softly along her jawline, my bonded. Ren blinked just once. Then she turned slightly, issuing a burst transmit to orbit. "Relay everything to Confederation High Council. Full breach of sovereignty. Genetic fraud confirmed. Corex license suspended pending tribunal." In the distance, the last Velmari Guard battalions emerged from the tree-lined weapons, lowered the Prime Minister's sigil glowing on their armor. Commander Sarn Veer led them, stepping forward to meet the Earth forces. His expression was cautious but respectful. He saluted Kael with a clenched fist to heart. "You saved more than one life today. You saved our name." Kael nodded. "You helped, eventually." Sarn offered the faintest of smiles. "We're not trained for improvisation. That's a human gift." Kael's grip on Lyssae's hand tightened. They were escorted back to the capital of Velmara 6 Orelon. The city was alive with shifting light and nervous energy. Spires twisted like crystal trees, arching over flowing bioluminescent plazas. Public displays had already begun cycling through news footage, the coup, the fraud, the resistance. And then them. Projected above the central plaza, Kael and Lyssae silhouetted against the light of the Bonwell bodies, close, energy pulsing between them like the beginning of a star. It had become a symbol. Lyssae watched the footage from the balcony of the Prime Minister's private chamber. The light of twin moons brushed silver against her skin. Kael stood beside her, jacket open, shoulder grazed with bandages. He leaned forward slightly, whispering just behind her ear. "We're going to be famous, aren't we?" She gave a soft, tired laugh. "Infamous. Among my people, this much intimacy should take 3 seasons and an ancestral blessing." Kael smirked. "I always did rush assignments." Her hand slid into his. "Do you regret it?" His answer was immediate. "No, not 1 second." Behind them, the Prime Minister concluded his address. formal apologies, termination of all agreements with Corex, and a declaration of ethical reclamation. The gemstone biological phenomenon would be recognized, not weaponized. All production placed under Velmari civilian control, shared responsibly, protected. Confederation delegates, some skeptical, some awed, watched silently from their balconies, but no one interrupted. Later, in a quiet wing of the Orellan medical complex, Kael stood beside a glowing chamber. Lyssae lay inside her body, suspended in soft blue light as nanocrystals repaired the damage from combat. Her pulse was steady, her breathing calm. Kael pressed a hand against the glass. A soft pulse responded from within. Her fingertips, glowing, faintly reached back. He stayed there a long time. 3 days passed. She healed faster than any projections had predicted. When she emerged barefoot and radiant, Kael was waiting with 2 mugs of steaming Velmari nectar and a grin that had survived 3 firefights and 1 species-wide controversy. She took the drink, sipped once, and raised an eyebrow. "This tastes like hope and fermented moss." He clinked his mug gently against hers. "Welcome to human taste." That night, under the canopy of the celestial gardens, they walked in silence. Light followed them, living foliage glowing to match the shade of Lyssae's skin. The trees responded to her presence now. Something had changed in her biology, in both of them. A mutation, or a message. As they reached the center of the garden, Kael paused. "Earth wants me back." She turned to him, breath-catching. "Will you go?" "I told them I'd only accept a new post," he said. "Here. Cultural liaison. Diplomatic intermediary. Technical specialist in biologically significant symbiosis." She stared at him. "Do you mean that?" He nodded once. "If you'll have me." Lyssae smiled and the garden erupted in light. In the days that followed, treaties were re-signed. Syndicate agents were prosecuted. Trade networks restructured. The bond between Earth and Velmara 6 was formalized. But beyond all of it, in whispers and myths, people began to talk of something else. The soldier who fell from the sky. The woman who glowed when she loved. And the moment they touched, the world changed. And that, dear listeners, is the story of how one soldier's fall from the stars uncovered not just a planetary secret, but an interstellar truth about connection choice and the power of unlikely love. Kael Vorn, the Earthborn scout, and Lyssae, the gem-blooded guardian of Velmara 6, didn't just survive the jungle, the Corex Syndicate, or the politics of 2 worlds, they transcended them. Through fusion trust and a spark shared across species, they proved that what begins as conflict can end in harmony. That the most powerful weapons aren't forged of steel, but of shared breath-synced heartbeats and the decision to protect rather than exploit. If you enjoyed this story, full of radiant combat, ancient mysteries, and glowing skin, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below. What would you do if you discovered your body-made gemstones? Would you hide it or start a revolution? This is the HFY channel, where humanity doesn't just survive the stars, we change them. Until next time, stay radiant, stay human.